Hi. I'll get started in just a moment, but before I do, may I ask you, if you haven't already, to take it's been a long time, I know, so if you can silence your cell phones, that'd be great. This will be there'll be two parts. In the first part of the program, I'm going to perform Gertrude Stein's lecture on theater, presented. And then in the second part of the program, I'm going to perform part of Four Saints in Three Acts, which I'll be performing as a solo in its entirety in the fall over at Target Margin Theater's Doxy Theater in Sunset Park. And the first part runs about 50 minutes, and the second part is shorter. Plays by Gertrude Stein. In a book I wrote called How to Write, I made a discovery which I considered fundamental, that sentences are not emotional, and that paragraphs are. I found out about language that paragraphs are emotional and sentences are not. And I found out something else about it. I found out that this difference was not a contradiction, but a combination. And that this combination causes one to think endlessly about sentences and paragraphs, because the emotional paragraphs are made up of unemotional sentences. I found out a fundamental thing about plays. The thing I found out about plays was, too, a combination and not a contradiction. And it was something that makes one think endlessly about plays. That something is this. The thing that is fundamental about plays is that the scene as depicted on the stage is more often than not, one might say it is almost always, in syncopated time in relation to the emotion of anybody in the audience. What this says is this. Your sensation as one in the audience in relation to the play played before you, your sensation, I say your emotion concerning that play, is always either behind or ahead of the play at which you are looking and to which you are listening. So your emotion as a member of the audience is never going on at the same time as the action of the play. This thing, the fact that your emotional time as an audience is not the same as the emotional time of the play is what makes one endlessly troubled about a play. Because not only is there a thing to know as to why this is so, but also there is a thing to know why perhaps it does not need to be so. This is a thing to know, and knowledge, as anybody can know, is a thing to get by getting. And so I will try to tell you what I had to get, and what perhaps I have gotten in plays. And to do so, I will tell you all that I ever felt about plays, or about any play. Plays are either read or heard or seen. And then comes the question, which comes first and which is first, reading or hearing or seeing a play? I ask you, what is knowledge? Of course, knowledge is what you know. And what you know is what you do know. What do I know about plays? In order to know, one must always go back. What was the first play I saw? And was I then already bothered about the difference in yourself and your emotion in having the play go on in front of you? I think I may say I know that I was already troubled by this and that my first experience at a play. The thing seen and the emotion did not go on together. This, that the thing seen and the thing felt about the thing seen, not going on at the same tempo, is what makes the being at the theater something that makes anybody nervous. The jazz bands made of this thing, the thing that makes you nervous at the theater. They made of this thing an end in itself. They made of this different tempo as something that was nothing but a difference in tempo between anybody and everybody, including all those doing it, and all those hearing and seeing it. In the theater, of course, this difference in tempo is less violent, but still it is there, and it does make anybody nervous. In the first place, at the theater, there is the curtain. And the curtain already makes one feel that one is not going to have the same tempo as the thing that is there behind the curtain. The emotion of you on one side of the curtain and what is on the other side of the curtain are not going to be going on together. One will always be behind or in front of the other. Then, also, beside the curtain, there is the audience. And the fact that they are or will be or will not be in the way when the curtain goes up, that too makes for nervousness. And nervousness is the certain proof that the emotion of the one seeing and the emotion of the thing seen do not progress together. Nervousness consists in needing to go faster or to go slower so as to get together. It is that makes anybody feel nervous. And is it a mistake that that is what the theater is? Or is it not? There are things that are exciting, as the theater is exciting, but do they make you nervous or do they not? And if they do, and if they do not, why do they? And why do they not? Let us think of 3 different kinds of things that are exciting and that make or do not make one nervous. First, any scene which is a real scene. Something real that is happening in which one takes part as an actor in that scene. Second, any book that is exciting. Third, the theater at which one sees an exciting action in which one does not take part. Now, in a real scene in which one takes part, at which one is an actor, what does one feel as to time? And what is it that does or does not make one nervous? And is your feeling at such a time ahead and behind the action the way it is when you are at the theater? It is the same and it is not, but more not. If you are taking part in an actual violent scene and you talk and they talk or he or she talk and it goes on and it gets more exciting, and finally then it happens, whatever it is that does happen, then when it happens, then at the moment of happening, is it a relief from the excitement or is it a completion of the excitement? In the real thing, it is a completion of the excitement. In the theater, it is a relief from the excitement. And in that difference, the difference between completion and relief is the difference between emotion concerning a thing seen on the stage and the emotion concerning a real presentation that is really something happening. This then is the fundamental difference between excitement in real life and on the stage. In real life, it culminates in a sense of completion, and on the stage, the exciting climax is a relief. And the memory of the two things is different. As you go over the detail that leads to culmination of any scene in real life, you find that each time you cannot get completion, but you can get relief. And so already your memory of any exciting scene in which you have taken part turns it into the thing seen or heard, not the thing felt. You have, as I say, as the result, relief rather than culmination. Relief from excitement rather than the climax of excitement. In this respect, an exciting story does the same, only in the exciting story, you, so to speak, have control of it. As you have in your memory of a really exciting scene, it is not as it is on the stage. A thing over which you have no real control. You can, with an exciting story, find out the end. And so begin over again, just as you can in remembering an exciting scene, but the stage is different. It is not real. And yet, it is not within your control as the memory of an exciting thing is, or the reading of an exciting book. No matter how well you know the end of the stage story, it is nevertheless not within your control as the memory of an exciting thing is, or as the written story of an exciting thing is, or even in a curious way, the heard story of an exciting thing is. And what is the reason for this difference? And what does it do to the stage? It makes for nervousness. That, of course. And the cause of nervousness is the fact that the emotion of the one seeing the play is always ahead or behind the play. Beside all this, there is a thing to be realized, and that is how you are being introduced to the characters in an exciting action, even when you yourself are one of the actors. And this too has to be very much thought about, and thought about in relation to an exciting real thing, to an exciting book, to an exciting theater. How are you introduced to the characters? There are then the three ways of having something be exciting, and the excitement may or may not make one nervous. A book being read that is exciting, a scene in which one takes part, or an action in which one takes part, and the theater at which one looks on. In each case, the excitement and the nervousness and the being behind or ahead in one's feeling is different. First, anything exciting in which one takes part. There, one progresses forward and back emotionally, and at the supreme crisis of the scene in which one takes part, in which one's hopes and loves and fears take part, at the extreme crisis of this thing, one is almost one with one's emotions. The action and the emotion go together. There is but just a moment of this coordination, but it does exist, otherwise there is no completion as no one has a result. No result of a scene in which one has taken part. And so instinctively, when any people are living an exciting moment one with another, they go on and on and on until the thing has come together. The emotion, the action, the excitement. That is the way it is when there is any violence, either of loving or hating or quarreling or losing or succeeding. But there has to be the moment of it all being abreast. The emotion, the excitement, and the action. Otherwise, there would be no succeeding and no failing, and so no one would go on living. Why, yes, of course not. That is life, the way it is lived. Why, yes, of course. And there is a reasonable, and sometimes an unreasonable, and very often not a reasonable amount of excitement in everybody's life. And when it happens in that way. Now, when you read a book, how is it? Well, it is not exactly like that. No, not even when a book is even more exciting than any excitement one has ever had. In the first place, one can always look at the end of the book and so quiet down one's excitement. The excitement having been quieted down, one can enjoy the excitement just as anyone can enjoy the excitement of anything having happened to them by remembering. And so tasting it over and over again, but each time less intensely, and each time until it is all over. Those who like to read books over and over get continuously the sensation of the excitement as if it were a pleasant, distant thunder that rolls and rolls, and the more it rolls, well, the further it rolls, the pleasanter, until it does not roll anymore. That is until at last you have read the book so often that it no longer holds any excitement, not even ever so faintly, And then you have to wait until you've forgotten it, and you can begin it again. Now the theater has still another way of being all this to you. The thing causing your emotion and the excitement in connection with it. What does the theater do? And how does it do it? What happens on the stage, and how does one feel about it? Is the thing seen or the thing heard the thing that makes most of its impression upon you at the theater? How much has the hearing to do with it, and how little? Does the thing heard replace the thing seen? Does it help, or does it interfere with it? And when you are taking part in something really happening that is exciting, how is it? Does the thing seen or does the thing heard affect you and affect you at the same time or in the same degree, or does it not? Can you wait to hear or can you wait to see? And which excites you the most? And what has either one to do with the completion of the excitement, when the excitement is a real excitement? With the theater, a great deal. In connection with reading an exciting book, the thing is again more complicated than just seeing, because of course in reading, one sees, but one also hears. And when the story is at its most exciting, does one hear more than one sees? Or does one not do so? I'm posing all these questions to you because, of course, in writing, all these things are things that are really most entirely really exciting. But, of course, yes. And in asking a question, one is not answering, but one is, as one may say, deciding about knowing. Knowing is what you know. And in asking these questions, although there is no one who answers these questions, there is in them that there is knowledge. Knowledge is what you know. And now, is the thing seen or the thing heard the thing that makes most of its impression upon you at the theater? And does, as the scene on the theater proceeds, does the hearing take the place of seeing, as perhaps it does when something real is being most exciting? Or does the seeing take the place of hearing, as it perhaps does when anything real is happening? Or does the mixture get to be more mixed, seeing and hearing, as perhaps it does when anything really exciting is really happening? If the emotion of the person looking at the theater does or does not do what it would do, it were really a real something that was happening, and they were taking part in it, or they were looking at it, when the emotion of the person looking on at the theater comes then at the climax to relief rather than completion, has the mixture of seeing and hearing something to do with this? And does this mixture have something to do with the nervousness of the emotion at the theater, which has perhaps to do with the fact that the emotion of the person at the theater is always behind and ahead of the scene at the theater, but not with it? There are then quite a number of things that anyone does or does not know. Does the thing heard replace the thing seen? Does it help it, or does it interfere with it? Does the thing seen replace the thing heard, or does it help, or does it interfere with it? I suppose one might have gotten to know a good deal about these things from the cinema, and how it changed from sight to sound, and how much, before there was real sound, how much of the sight was sound, or how much it was not. In other words, the cinema undoubtedly had a new way of understanding sight and sound in relation to emotion and time. I may say that, as a matter of fact, the thing which has induced a person like myself to constantly think about the theater from the standpoint of sight and sound and its relation to emotion and time, rather than in relation to story and action, is the same as, you may say, general form of conception as the inevitable experiments made by the cinema, although the method of doing so has naturally nothing to do with the other. I myself never go to the cinema, or hardly ever, practically never, and the cinema has never read my work. The fact remains that there is the same impulse to solve the problem of time in relation to emotion, and the relation of the scene to the emotion of the audience in the one case as in the other. There is the same impulse to solve the problem of the relation of seeing and hearing in the one case as in the other. It is, in short, the inevitable problem of anybody living in the composition of the present time. That is, living as we are now living, as we have it, and now do live in it. The business of art, as I try to explain in composition and explanation, is to live in the actual present. That is, the complete actual present, and to completely express that complete actual present. Let's come back to that other question, which is at once so important a part of any scene in real life, in books, or on the stage. How are the actors introduced to the sight, hearing, and consciousness of the person having the emotion about them? How is it done in each case, and what has that to do with the way the emotion progresses? How are the actors in a real scene introduced to those acting with them in that scene? How are the real actors in a real scene introduced to you, who are going to be in an exciting scene with them? How does it happen? That is, as it usually happens. And how are the actors in a book scene introduced to the reader of the book? How does one come to know them? That is, how is one really introduced to them? And how are the people on the stage? That is, the people the actors act. How are they introduced to the audience, and what is the reason why? The reason they are introduced in the way they are introduced, and what happens, and how does it matter, and how does it affect the emotions of the audience. In a real scene, naturally in a real scene, you either have already very well known all the actors in the real scene of which you are one, or you have not. More generally, you have than you have not. But, and this is the element of excitement in an exciting scene. It quite, of course, is the element of excitement in an exciting scene, that is, in a real scene. All that you have known of the person, including yourself, who are taking part in the exciting scene, although you have most probably known them very well, what makes it exciting is that insofar as the scene is exciting, they, the actors in the scene, including yourself, might just as well have been strangers, because they all act, talk, and feel differently from the way you have expected them to act, feel, or talk. And this, that they feel, act, and talk, including yourself, differently from the way you would have thought they would act, feel, and talk, makes the scene an exciting scene. It makes the climax of the scene, which is a real scene, a climax of completion and not a climax of relief. That is what a real scene is. Would it make any difference in a real scene if they were all strangers? If they had never known each other? Yes, it would. It would be practically impossible in the real scene to have a really exciting scene if they were all strangers, because generally speaking, it is the contradiction between the way you know the people you know, including yourself, act, and the way they are acting, or feeling, or talking, that makes any scene that is an exciting scene an exciting scene. Of course, there are other exciting scenes in peace and in war, in which the exciting scene takes place with strangers. But in that case, for the purpose of excitement, you are all strangers, but so completely strangers, including you yourself to yourself, as well as the others to each other and to you, that they are not really individuals. And insomuch as that is so, it has the advantage and the disadvantage that you proceed by a series of completions which follow each other so closely that when it is all over, you cannot remember. That is, you cannot really reconstruct the thing that has happened. That is something that one must think about in relation to the theater, and it is a very interesting thing. Then, in a case like that, where you are all strangers in an exciting scene, what happens as far as hearing and seeing is concerned? When in an exciting scene, where you are all strangers, you to yourself, you to them, and they to you, and they to each other, and where no one of all of them, including yourself, have any consciousness of knowing each other, do you have the disadvantage of not knowing the difference between hearing and seeing? And is that a disadvantage from the standpoint of remembering? From that standpoint, the standpoint of remembering, it is a serious disadvantage. In the kind of excitement where you have had no normal introduction to the actors of the scene, the action and the emotion is so violent that sight and sound and emotion is so little realized that it cannot be remembered. Has this anything to do with the way the theater gets you to know or not to know what the people on the stage are? Perhaps yes, and perhaps no. In ordinary life, one has known pretty well the people with whom one is having the exciting scene before the exciting scene takes place. And one of the most exciting elements in the excitement, be it love or a quarrel or a struggle, is that having been well known, that is familiarly known, they all act in acting violently, act in the same way as they always did, of course, only the same way has become so completely different that from the standpoint of familiar acquaintance, there is none. There is complete familiarity, but there is no proportion that has hereto been known. And it is this which makes the scene, the real scene, exciting. And it is this that leads to completion. The proportion achieved in your emotion, the new proportion. Therefore, it is a completion, but not a relief. A new proportion cannot be a relief. Now, how does one naturally get acquainted in real life, which makes one have a familiarity with someone? By a prolonged familiarity, of course. And how does one achieve this familiarity with the people in a book or the people on the stage? Or does one? In real life, the familiarity is, of course, the result of accident, intention, or natural causes, but in any case, there is a progressive familiarity that makes one acquainted. Now, in a book, there is an attempt to do the same thing, that is to say, to do a double thing, to make the people in the book familiar with each other, and to make the reader familiar with them. That is the reason in a book it is always a strange doubling. The familiarity between the characters in the book is a progressive familiarity, and the familiarity between them and the reader is a familiarity that is a forcing process, or an incubation. But now, how about the theater? It is not possible in the theater to produce familiarity, which is, of course, the essence of acquaintance, because in the first place, when the actors are there, and they are there right away. When one reads a play, and very often one does read a play. Anyway, one did read Shakespeare's play a great deal, at least I did. It was always necessary to keep one's finger in the list of characters for at least the whole first act. And in a way, it is necessary to do the same when the play is played. One has one's program for that, and decide what has to become, or has become acquainted with the actors as an actor, and one has one's program too for that. And so the introduction to the characters on the stage has a great many different sides to it. And this has, again, a great deal to do with the nervousness of the theater, excitement. Anybody who was, as I was, brought up, and at the time that I was brought up in Oakland and in San Francisco, inevitably went to the theater a lot. Actors in those days liked to go out to the coast, and as it was expensive to get back and not expensive to stay, there they stayed. Besides that, there were a great many foreign actors who came, and having come stayed, and any actor who stays acts. And so there was always a great deal to see on the stage, and children went. They went with each other, and they went alone, and they went with people who were older. And there was 25-cent opera to which anybody went. And the theater was natural, and anybody went to the theater. I did go a great deal in those days. I also read plays a great deal. I rather like reading plays. I very much like reading plays. In the first place, there was, in reading plays, as I have said, the necessity of going forward and back to the list of characters to find out which was which, and then insensibly to know. Then there was the poetry, and then gradually there were the portraits. I can remember quite definitely in the reading of plays that there were very decidedly these three things. The way of getting acquainted that was not an imitation of what one usually did, but the having to remember which character was which. No, very different from real life, or from a book. Then there was the element of poetry. Poetry connected with a play was livelier poetry than poetry unconnected with a play. In the first place, there were a great many bits that were short, and sometimes it was only a line. I remember Henry VI, which I read and reread, and which of course I have never seen played, but which I like to read because there were so many characters, and there were so many little bits in it that were lively words. In the poetry of plays, words are more lively words than in any other kind of poetry. And if one naturally liked lively words, and I naturally did, one likes to read plays in poetry. I always, as a child, read all the plays I could get hold of that were in poetry. Plays in prose do not read so well. The words in prose are livelier when they are not a play. I'm not saying anything about why. It is just a fact. So then for me there was the reading of plays, which was one thing, and then there was the seeing of plays and of operas, a great many of them, which was another thing. Later on, so very much later on, there was for me the writing of plays, which was one thing, and there was at that time no longer any seeing of plays. I practically, when I wrote my first play, had completely ceased going to the theater. In fact, although I have written a great many plays, and I'm quite sure they are plays, I have, since I commenced writing these plays, I've practically never been inside of any kind of a theater. Of course, none of this has been intentional. One may say, generally speaking, that anything that is really inevitable, that is to say necessary, is not intentional. But to go back to the plays I did see, and then to go on to the plays I did write. It was then a natural thing in the Oakland and San Francisco in which I was brought up to see a great many plays played. Besides, there was a great deal of opera played, and so all of it was natural enough, and how did I feel about it? Generally speaking, all the early recollections, all a child's feeling of the theater is two things. One, which is in a way like a circus. That is the general movement and light and air which any theater has, and a great deal of glitter in the light, and a great deal of height in the air. And then there are moments, very, very few moments, but still moments. One must be pretty far advanced in adolescence before one realizes a whole play. Up to the time of adolescence, when one does really live in a whole play, up to that time, the theater consists of bright-filled space, and usually not more than one moment in a play. I think this is fairly everybody's experience, and it was completely mine. Uncle Tom's Cabin may not have been my first play, but it was very nearly my first play. I think my first play really was Pinafore in London, but the theater there was so huge that I do not remember at all seeing a stage. I only remember that it felt like a theater. That is, the theater did. Oh, I doubt I did see the stage. In Uncle Tom's Cabin, I remember only the escape across the ice. I imagine because the blocks of ice moving up and down naturally would catch my eye more than the people on the stage. The next thing was the opera. The 25-cent opera of San Francisco and the fight in Faust. But that, I imagine, was largely because my brother had told me about the fight in Faust. As a matter of fact, I gradually saw more of the opera because I saw it quite frequently. Then there was Buffalo Bill and the Indian Attack. Well, of course, anybody raised where everybody collected arrowheads and played Indians would notice Indians. And then there was Lohengrin. And there, all that I saw was the swan being changed into a boy. Our insisting on seeing that made my father with us lose the last boat home to Oakland. But my brother and I did not mind, naturally not, as it was the moment. In spite of my having seen operas quite often, the first thing that I remember as sound on the stage was the playing by some English actor of Richelieu at the Oakland Theater, and his repeated calling out, "Nemours! Nemours!" That is the first thing that I remember hearing with my ears at the theater. And as I say, nothing is more interesting to know about the theater than the relation of sight and sound. It is always the most interesting thing to know about anything, to know whether you hear or you see, and how one has to do with the other. It is one of the important things in finding out how you know what you know. Then, I enormously remember Booth playing Hamlet. But there again, the only thing I noticed, rather a strange thing to have noticed, is his lying at the Queen's feet during the play. One would suppose that a child would notice other things in the play than that, but that is what I remember. And I noticed him there more than I did the play he saw, although I knew there was a play going on there. It is the little play. It was in this way that I first felt two things going on at one time. That is something that one has to come to feel. The next thing I knew was adolescence and going to the theater all the time, a great deal alone. And all of it making an outside-inside existence for me. Not so real as books, which were all inside me, but so real that it, the theater, made me real outside of me, which up to that time I had never been in my emotion. I'd largely been so in an active daily life, but not in any emotion. Then, gradually, there came the beginning of really realizing the great difficulty of having my emotion accompany the scene. And then, moreover, I became fairly consciously troubled by the things over which one stumbles to such an extent that the time of one's emotion in relation to the scene was always interrupted. The things over which one stumbled, and there it was a matter both of seeing and of hearing, were clothes, voices, what they, the actors, said, and how that related itself to their moving around. Then the bother of never being able to begin over again. Because before it commenced, it was over. And in no time had you been ready either to commence or to be over. Then I began to vaguely wonder whether I could see and hear at the same time, and which helped or interfered with the other, and which helped or interfered with the thing on the stage having been over before it really commenced. Could I see and hear and feel at the same time? And did I? I began to be a good deal troubled by this thing. The more emotion I felt while at the theater, the more troubled I became by all these things. And then I was relieved. As I said, San Francisco was a wonderful place to hear and see foreign actors, as at that time they liked it when they got there, and they stayed and they played. I must have been about 16 years old, and Bernhardt came to San Francisco and stayed 2 months. I knew a little French, of course, but really it did not matter. It was all so foreign, and her voice being so varied, and it all being so French. I could rest in it untroubled, and I did. It was better than the opera because it went on. It was better than the theater because you did not have to get acquainted. The manners and customs of the French theater created a thing in itself, and it existed in and for itself, as the poetical plays had that I used so much to read. There were so many characters, just as there were in those plays, and you did not have to know them. They were so foreign. And the foreign scenery and actuality replaced the poetry, and the voices replaced the portraits. It was for me a very simple, direct, and moving pleasure. This experience, curiously enough, and yet perhaps it was not so curious, awakened me a desire for melodrama on the stage. Because there again, everything happened so quietly, one did not have to get acquainted. And as what the people felt was of no importance, one did not have to realize what was said. This pleasure in melodrama, and in those days, there was always one theater in a theatrically inclined town that played melodrama. This pleasure in melodrama culminated for me in the Civil War dramas of that period, and the best of them was, of course, Secret Service. Gillette had conceived a new technique: silence, stillness, quick movement. Of course, it had been done in the melodrama already by the villains, particularly in such plays as The Queen of Chinatown and those that had to do with telegraph operators. But Gillette had not only done it, but he had conceived it, and it made the whole stage, the whole play, this technique: silence, stillness, quick movement. One was no longer bothered by the theater. You had to get acquainted, of course, but that was quickly over. And after that, nothing bothered. In fact, Gillette created what the cinema later repeated by mixing up the short story and the stage. But there is yet the trouble with the cinema that it is, after all, a photograph. And a photograph continues to be a photograph. And yet it can it become something else? Perhaps it can, but that is a whole other question. If it can, then someone will have to feel that about it. But to go on. From then on, I was less and less interested in the theater. I became more interested in opera. One went, and the whole business almost came together, and then finally, just finally, I came not to care at all for music. So, having concluded that music was made for adolescents and not for adults, and having just left adolescence behind me, and besides, I knew all the operas by that time anyway, I did not care anymore for opera. Then I came to Paris to live, and there for a long time I did not go to the theater at all. I forgot the theater. I never thought about the theater. I did sometimes think about the opera. I went to the opera once in Venice, and I liked it. And then much later, Strauss's Electra made me realize that in a kind of way, there could be a solution of the problem of conversation on the stage. Besides, it was a new opera, and it was quite exciting to hear something unknown. Really unknown. But as I say, I settled down to Paris life, and I forgot the theater and almost forgot opera. There was, of course, Isadora Duncan, and then the Russian ballet, and in between Spain and the Argentine bullfights, and I began once more to feel something about something going on at a theater. And then I went back, not in my reading, but in my feeling to the reading of plays in my childhood. The lots of characters, the poetry, and the portraits, and the scenery, which was always, of course, and ought always to be, of course, woods. That is forests and trees, and streets, and windows. And so one day, all of a sudden, I began to write plays. I remember very well the first one I wrote. I called it What Happened? A Play. It is in geography and plays, as are all the plays I wrote at that time. I think, and always have thought, that if you write a play, you ought to announce that it is a play. And that is what I did. What happened? A play. I had just come home from a pleasant dinner party, and I realized then, as anybody can know, that something is always happening. Something is always happening. Anybody knows a quantity of stories, of people's lives, that are always happening. There are always plenty for the newspapers, and there are always plenty in private life. Everybody knows so many stories. And what is the use of telling another story? What is the use of telling a story? Since there are so many, and everybody knows so many, and knows so many. In the country, it is perfectly extraordinary how many complicated dramas go on all the time, and everybody knows them. So why tell another one? There's always a story going on. So naturally, what I wanted to do in my play was what everybody did not always know, nor always tell. By everybody, I do, of course, include myself. By always, I do, of course, include myself. And so I wrote What Happened? A Play. Then I wrote Ladies' Voices. And then I wrote Curtain Raiser. I did this last because I wanted still more to tell what could be told if one did not tell anything. Then I went to Spain, and there I wrote a lot of plays. I concluded that anything that was not a story could be a play, and I even made plays in letters and advertisements. I had, before I began writing plays, written many portraits. I had been enormously interested all my life in finding out what made each one that one, and that there are a number of them, each one being that one. The only way to express this thing, each one being that one and there being a number of them knowing each other, was in a play. And so I began to write these plays. And the idea in What Happened? To Play was to express this without telling what happened. In short, to make a play the essence of what happened. I tried to do this with the first series of plays that I wrote. What Happened? To Play. A tiger, a rat, and surrounded overcoat, securely arranged with spots, old enough to be thought useful and witty, quite witty, in a secret and in a blinding flurry. Act 2. 4 and nobody wounded, 5 and nobody flourishing, 6 and nobody talkative, 8 and nobody sensible, 1 and a left-hand lip that is so heavy that there is no way of pronouncing perfectly, a point of accuracy, a point of a strange stone, a point that is so sober that the reason left is all the chance of swelling, a wide oak, a wide enough oak, a very wide cake, a lightning cookie, a single wide open and exchange box filled with the same little sack that shines. The best, the only better and more left-footed stranger. Very kindness that is in all lemons, oranges, apples, pears, and potatoes. I have, of course, always been struggling with this thing, to say what you nor I nor nobody knows, but what is really what you and I and everybody knows. And as I say, everybody hears stories, but the thing that makes each one what he is not that. Everybody hears stories and knows stories. How can they not? Because that is what anybody does and what everybody tells. But in my portraits, I try to tell what each one is without telling stories. And now in my early plays, I try to tell what happened without telling stories, so that the essence of what happened would be like the essence of the portraits. What made what happened would be what it was. And then I had for the moment gone as far as I could then go in plays, and I went back to poetry and portraits and description. Then I began to spend my summers in Belington in the department of the Ain, and there I lived in a landscape that made itself its own landscape. I slowly came to feel that since the landscape was the thing, I tried to write it down in Lucy Church amiably, and I did, but I wanted it even more really. In short, I found that since the landscape was the thing, a play was the thing. And I went on writing plays, a great many plays. The landscape at Belington so completely made a play that I wrote quantities of plays. I felt that if a play was exactly like a landscape, then there would be no difficulty about the emotion of the person looking on at the play being behind or ahead of the play, because the landscape does not have to make acquaintance. You may have to make acquaintance with it, but it does not with you. It is there. And so the play being written, the relation between you at any time is so exactly that it is of no importance unless you look at it. Well, I did look at it. And the result is in all the plays that I have printed as operas and plays. A list. A play. If on a day that comes again, and we consider a day a weekday, it does come again. If on a day that comes again, and we consider every day to be a day that comes again, it comes again when accidentally, when very accidentally, every other day, and every other day, and every other day, and every other day that comes again, and every day comes again, when accidentally every other day comes again, every other day comes again, and every other, and every day comes again, and accidentally, and every day, and it comes again, a day comes again, and a day in that way comes again. The landscape has its formation, and as after all, a play has to have formation and be in relation, one thing to the other thing. And as the story is not the thing, as anyone is always telling something, and the landscape not moving but being always in relation, the trees to the hills to the fields, the trees to each other, any piece of it to any sky, and then any detail to any other detail, the story is only of importance if you like to tell or like to hear a story. But the relation is there anyway. And of that relation, I wanted to make a play. And I did. A great many plays. The only one that has been played is Four Saints. In Four Saints, I made the saints the landscape. All the saints that I made, and I made a number of them, because after all, a great many pieces of things are in a landscape. All these saints together made my landscape. These attendant saints were the landscape, and it, the play, really is a landscape. A landscape does not move. Nothing really moves in a landscape, but things are there. And I put into the play the things that were there. Magpies are in the landscape. That is, they are in the sky of the landscape. They are black and white, and they are in the sky of the landscape in Belignen and in Spain, especially in Avila. When they are in the sky, they do something that I have never seen any other bird do. They hold themselves up and down and look flat against the sky. A very famous French inventor of things that have to do with stabilization and aviation told me that what I told him magpies did could not be done by any bird. But anyway, whether the magpies at Avila do it or do not, at least they look as if they do. They look exactly like the birds in the Annunciation pictures, the bird which is the Holy Ghost and rests flat against the side sky very high. There were magpies in my landscape, and there were scarecrows. The scarecrows on the ground are the same thing as the magpies in the sky. They are part of the landscape. They, the magpies, may tell their story if they and you like, or even if I like. The stories are only stories. But that they stay in the air is not a story, but a landscape. The scarecrows stay on the ground is the same thing. It could be a story, but it is a piece of the landscape. Then, as I said, streets and windows are also landscape, and they added to my Spanish landscape. While I was writing The Four Saints, I wanted, one always does want, the saints to be actually saints, before them as well as inside them. I had to see them as well as feel them. As it happened, there is on the Boulevard Raspail a place where they make photographs that have always held my attention. They take a photograph of a young girl dressed in the costume of her ordinary life, and little by little, in successive photographs, they change it into a nun. These photographs are small, and the thing takes 4 or 5 changes, but at the end, it is a nun. And this is done for the family when the nun is dead and in memoriam. For years, I had stood and looked at these when I was walking. And finally, when I was writing St. Therese, in looking at these photographs, I saw how St. Therese existed from the life of an ordinary young lady to that of a nun. And so everything was actual, and I went on writing. Then, in another window, this time on the Rue de Rennes, there was a rather large porcelain, and it was of a young soldier giving alms to a beggar and taking off his helmet and his armor and leaving them in the charge of another. It was somehow just what the young St. Ignatius did. And anyway, it looked like him as I had known about him, and so he too became actual. Not as actual as St. Therese in the photographs, but still actual. And so the Four Saints got written. Four Saints, an opera in 3 acts. To know, to love her so. For saints, prepare for saints. It makes it well fish. For saints, it makes it well fish. For saints, prepare for saints, it makes it. Well fish, it makes it. Well fish, prepare for saints. In narrative, prepare for saints. Prepare for saints. 2 saints, 4 saints. 2 saints, prepare for saints, and 2 saints, prepare for saints. In prepare for saints. A narrative of prepare for saints. In narrative, prepare for saints. All of it, to be, not to be, not to be, left to be, to him, and standing. Saint Therese seated. Left to be, not to be, not to be, left to be, and left to be, not to be. Saint Therese seated, and if he could be standing, and standing, and saying, and saying, and left to be. Introducing Saint Ignatius, left to be. Saint Therese seated, seated, and left to be, if to be, if left to be, if left to be, if left to be. Saint Ignatius standing. She has no one to say so. He said so actually. She can have no one. No one can have anyone, anyone can have not, anyone can have, anyone can have, anyone can have to say so. Saint Therese could be photographed having been dressed like a lady, and then they taking out her head, changed it to a nun, a saint, and a saint so. Saint Therese seated and not surrounded might be very well inclined to be settled. Saint Therese actively. All these things might have been a story. But as a landscape, they were just there. And a play is just there. That is the way, at least, I feel about it. Anyway, I did write For Saints, an opera to be sung, and I think it did almost what I wanted. It made a landscape, and the movement in it was like a movement in and out with which anybody looking on can keep in time. I also wanted to have the movement of nuns, very busy and in continuous movement, but placid as a landscape has to be, because after all, the life in a convent is the life of a landscape. It may look excited. A landscape does sometimes look excited, but its quality is that a landscape, if ever it did go away, would have to go away to stay. Anyway, the play, as I see it, is exciting, and it moves, and it also stays, and that is, as I said in the beginning, might be what a play should do. Anyway, I am pleased. People write me that they are having a good time while the opera is going on, a thing which they say does not very often happen to them at the theater. So you do see what I have, after all, meant. And so this is, just at present, all I know about the theater. If you come back, I'll do some For Saints for you. If by any chance you turned on your cell phones at the break, please turn them off. This part takes about a little over half hour, and it's For Saints, and I hope you enjoy it. For Saints in 3 acts. By Gertrude Stein. To know, to love her so. For saints, prepare for saints. It makes it well fish. For saints, it makes it well fish. For saints, prepare for saints, it makes it well fish, it makes it well fish, prepare for saints. In narrative, prepare for saints. Prepare for saints. 2 saints, 4 saints, 2 saints, prepare for saints. Saints, prepare for saints, in Prepare for Saints. A narrative of Prepare for Saints. In narrative, Prepare for Saints. Remain to narrate, to prepare 2 saints for saints. At least, in finally, very well if not to have, and minor. A saint is 1, to be for 2, when 3, and you make 5, and 2, and cover. At most, saint, saint, a saint, forgotten saint. What happened today? A narrative. We had intended, if it were a pleasant day, to go to the country. It was a very beautiful day. We carried out our intention. We went to places that we had been when we were equally pleased, and we found very nearly what we could find. And returning saw and heard that after all they were rewarded likewise. This makes it necessary to go again. He came and said he was hurrying and hurrying to remain. He said, finally to be and claim it. He said, feeling very nearly everything as it had been, as if he could be precious to like it as it had been, that if he was used, it would always do it good. And now this time, that it was as if it had been just the same as longer, when as before it made to be left to be more and softly. They can be changed to speck. A speck as it makes blue be often sooner, which is shared when theirs is in polite and reply. That in there be the same with diminish. always, in respect to not at all, and farther. Farther might be known as counted with it, gain, to be and retain, which it is not be, because of most. This is how they do not like it. Why, while in this way was it after this, that to be seen made left it. He could be hurt at that. It is very easy to be left. Imagine 4 benches separately. 1 in the sun, 2 in the sun, 3 in the sun. 1 not. Not 1. Not in the sun. Not 1. 4 benches used. 4 benches used separately. 4 benches used separately. That makes it be not, it makes it not be at the time. The time that it is as well as it could be. Leave it. When it was to be. That it was to be. When it was, went away. 4 benches would leave it. Might have. As would be. As would be. As within. Within nearly as out. It is very close. Close and closed. 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 To letting, close, close, close. Chose. Injustice, enjoin. Enjoining. This is where to be at. At water. At snow, snow. Show. One, sun and sun. Snow. Show and no water. No water. Unless. Why unless? Why unless? Why unless they were loaning it here? Loaning intentionally. Believe. 2, 3. What could be sad? Beside, very attentively, intentionally, and bright. Begin suddenly not with sisters. If a great many people were deceived, who would be, by the way, to mount it up, uphill? 4 saints are never 3. 3 saints are never 4. 4 saints are never left altogether. 3 saints are never idle. 4 saints are leave it to me. 3 saints, when this you see. Begin 3 saints. Begin 4 saints. And 2 saints. 1 and 3 saints. In place. One shouldn't. Easily saints. Very well. Saints. Have saints. Said saints. I said saints. And not annoy. Anoint. Choice. 4 saints 2 at a time. Have to. Have to have. 2 saints 4 at a time. A time. Have to at a time. 4 saints have to have at a time. The difference between saints, forget-me-nots, and mountains. Have to at a time. It's very easy in winter to remember winter, spring, and summer. It is very easy in winter to remember spring and winter and summer. It is very easy in winter to remember summer, spring, and winter. It is very easy in winter to remember spring and summer and winter. Does it show? As if it could be that very successful, that he was very successful, that he was with them, as was said in the percentage of power, we take it away that way, away to go. Some say so. Why should everyone be at home? Why should everyone be at home? Why should everyone be at home? Why should everyone be at home in idle acts? Why should everybody be at home in idle acts? He made very much more than he did. He did make very much of it. He did not only add to his part of it, but, and with it, he was at it, and in a plight. There is no party color in a house. There is no party color in a house. Reflections by the time that they were given the package that had been sent. Very much what they would do as a decision. Supposing, she said, that he had chosen all the miseries that he had observed in 50 of his years. What had that to do with hats? They made hats for her. Not really. As she was. Imagine. Imagine it. Imagine it in it. When she returned, there was considerable rain. On some evening, it would be asked, was there anything especial? By plainly, it making acutely a corner, not at right angle, but individual, is it? How could it have been? Have been held, a narrative, who does? A narrative to plan an opera for saints in 3 acts, a croquet scene. And when they made their habits, not hourly habits, not hourly at the time that they made their habits, not hourly, they made their habits. When they made their habits, to know when they made their habits, large pigeons in small trees, large pigeons in small trees, come, panic, come close, acts, 3 acts, come close to croquet. 4 saints. Rejoice, saints, rejoin, saints, recommence, some reinvite. 4 saints have been sometime in that way, all. 4 saints were not born at one time, although they knew each other. One of them had a birthday before the mother, the other one the father. 4 saints later to be. To be one. To be, might tingle, tangle, wood, tanglewood. 4 saints, born in separate places. Saint. 4 saints. An opera in 3 acts. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Saint Therese, something like that. Saint Therese, something like that. Saint Therese would. Saint Therese, something like that. Saint Therese. Saint Therese, half in and half out of doors. Saint Therese not knowing of other saints. Saint Therese used to go, not to tell them so, but to around. So that Saint Therese did find that, and there, if any came. This is to say that 4 saints may never have seen the daylight. Any day like Saint Ignatius meant and met. This is to say that 4 saints, many never have, any day like, gradually wait. Anyone conceive that any saint to be Saint Therese, Saint Ignatius, Saint Martyr, Saint Paul, Saint Settlement, Saint William, Saint Thomasine, Saint Gilbert, Saint Elector, Saint Settle, Saint Wilhelmina, Saint Arthur, Saint Evelyn, Saint Selmer, Saint Pilar, Saint Paulses, Saint Hilaire, Saint Cardinal, Saint Bernardine, Saint Plan, Saint Giuseppe. Anyone to tease a saint, seriously. Act 1. Saint Therese in a storm at Avia. There can be rain and warm snow and warm. That is, the water is warm, the river is not warm, the sun is not warm. And if to stay, to cry. If to stay, to stay. If having to stay, to. If having to stay. If to cry, to stay. If to cry, stay. To cry, to stay. Saint Therese, half in and half out of doors. Saint Ignatius not there. Saint Ignatius staying where? Never heard them speak. Speak of it. Saint Ignatius, silent motive. not hidden. Saint Therese, silent. They were never beset. Come one, no saint to remember, no saint to remember. Saint Therese, knowing young and told. If it were possible to kill 5,000 Chinamen by pressing a button, would it be done? Saint Therese, not interested. Repeat first act. A pleasure. April Fool's Day. A pleasure. Saint Therese seated. Not April Fool's Day. A pleasure. Saint Therese seated. Not April Fool's Day. A pleasure. Saint Therese seated. April Fool's Day. April Fool's Day. As not as pleasure as April Fool's Day. Not a pleasure. Saint Therese seated and not surrounded. There are very many persons and places near together. Saint Therese not seated. There are very many persons and places near together. Saint Therese not seated. There are very many persons and places near together. Saint Therese not seated at once. There are very many places and persons near together. Saint Therese once seated. There are very many places and persons near together. Saint Therese seated and not surrounded. There are very many places and persons near together. Saint Therese visited by very many, as well as the others, really visited. Before she was seated, there are a great many persons and places close together. Saint Therese, not young and younger, but visited like the others by some who are frequently going there. Saint Therese, very nearly half inside, half outside, outside the house, and not surrounded. How do you do? Very well, I thank you. And when do you go? Well, I'm staying on quite continuously. When is it planned? Not more than as often. The garden. Inside and outside of the wall. Saint Therese, about to be the garden. Inside and outside. Outside and inside of the wall. Nobody visits more than they do visits them. Saint Therese. Nobody visits more than they do visits them. Saint Therese. As loud as that. As loud as that. Saint Therese, nobody visits more than they do visits them. Who settles a private life? Saint Therese. 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 Who settles a private life? Enact an end of an act. All of it to be not to be left to be to him and standing. Saint Therese seated, left to be not to be left to be and left to be not to be. Saint Therese seated, and if he could be sang, left to be. Introducing Saint Ignatius, left to be. Saint Therese seated, and left to be, if left to be, if to be. Saint Ignatius standing. She has no one to say so. He said so, actually. She can have no one can have, anyone can have to say so. Saint Therese seated and not standing. Half and half of it, and not half and half of it. Seated and not standing, surrounded and not seated, and not seated and not standing, and not surrounded and not surrounded, and not seated, not seated, not seated, not surrounded, not seated. And Saint Ignatius standing, not seated. Saint Therese, not standing, and Saint Ignatius, not standing, surrounded, as if in once, yesterday, in place of situations. Saint Therese could be very much interested not only in settlement, and this not with this, whither? whither? It must be additional. Saint Therese, having not commenced, did she want him dead, if now? Saint Therese could be photographed having been dressed like a lady, and then they, taking out her head, changed it to a nun and a nun, a saint and a saint so. Saint Therese might be very well inclined to be settled. Saint Therese actively made to be coming to be here. How many saints can sit around? Great many saints can sit around, one standing. Saint Therese, great many saints seated. They move through the country in winter and winter and time. Saint Therese is moving. Now 3 can be seated in front. The saint is easily resisted. Saint Therese. Let it as land, Saint Therese, as land beside a house. Saint Therese, as land beside a house, and at one time, Saint Therese, as land beside a house to be to this which there's beneath. Saint Therese, Saint Therese. Saints make sugar with a flavor in different ways when it is practicable. Saint Therese, in invitation, Saint Therese. Could she know that he was not to be dead? Not dead, Saint Therese, so much withheld with that. Saint Therese, nobody can do so. Saint Therese, Saint Therese, must be, chain left, chain right, chain, is it? No one chain, is it not chain, is it? Chain to not to life, chain to not to snow, chained, to chain to go, and then gone. Saint Therese might become to be in this, not indifferently. Saint Therese, not this, not in this, not with this. Saint Therese must be theirs first. Saint Therese, as a young girl being widowed. Saint Therese, can she sing? Saint Therese, leave later gaily. The troubadour plays his guitar. Saint Therese, might it be Saint Louise and Saint Celestine and Saint Louis, Paul and Saint Settlement, Fernand and Ignatius, Saint Therese. Can women have wishes? Scene 2. Many saints seen, and in between, many saints seen. Saint Therese and Saint Therese and Saint Therese. Many saints as seen, and in between, as many saints as seen. Seen. Many saints as seen. Saint Therese and sound. She is to meet her. Can 2 saints be one? Saint Therese and fasten. Very many go out as they do. Saint Therese and make him prominent. Saint Therese, could a Negro be with the beard to see and to be? Saint Therese, never have to have seen a Negro there, and with it so. Saint Therese, to differ between go and so. Saint Therese and 3 saints, all one. Saint Settlement, Saint Fernand. Saint John says, Saint Paul 6, Saint Therese with these saints, who separated saints at one time. Saint Therese in following saints. Saint Therese to be somewhere with or without saints. Saint Therese can never mention the others. Saint Therese to them saints not found. all four saints, not more than all four saints. Saint Therese, come again to the absolute. Scene 3. Saint Therese to an occasion louder. Saint Therese coming to be selfish. Saint Therese, allow all four saints, remembering not to be with them. Could all four saints not only be grief? Saint Therese, contumely. Saint Therese advancing, who can be shortly in their way? Saint Therese having heard in this way as movement, in having been in. Does she want to be neglectful of hyacinths and fine violets? Saint Therese should never change herbs for pansies and dry them. They think there that it is their share. And please, Saint Therese makes us in this to be as stems and wild. Saint Therese settled, and some come to be near, not near her, but the same. Surround them with a third than that. Saint Therese might be illustrated, come to be in between, beginning earlier than anything, around. Saint Therese seated, with the name and choosing. How many are there? Having. Scene 3. Therese in Saint Ignatius, and Saint Settlement to be sure. Saint Therese having known that no snow in vain, as snow is not vain. Saint Therese needed it as she was. Saint Therese made it be third, snow third, high third, their third. Saint Therese in allowance. How many saints can remember a house which was built before they can remember? 10 saints can. Candy and Mandy and Sandy, and on a high plateau there is no sand, there is no snow, and there is made to be so, and very much can be what there is to see. When there is a wind, they have to try and be what they can undertake to let it be descended, well, as much as none to be behind. None to be behind. Enclosure. Saint Therese. None to be behind. Enclosure. Saint Ignatius could be in porcelain actually. Saint Ignatius could be in porcelain actually while he was young and standing. Saint Therese could not be young and standing. She could be sitting. Saint Ignatius could be in porcelain actually in porcelain standing. Saint Therese could be in moving seating. Saint Therese could be in moving sitting. Saint Therese could be. Saint Ignatius could be. Saint Ignatius could be in porcelain actually in porcelain standing. They might, in at most, not leave out an egg and add some. Some and some. Add some. Let it in around. With C's, with knees, with keys, with pleases. Go and no. In. Clouded. Included. Saint Therese and attachment with anyone please, no one to be behind, and enclosure. Suddenly, to see, to intend, Saint 2 and Saint 10. C4. Did a most agree that it was not the maiden method that was separated longitudinally, while it escapes, it adds to it, just as it did when it has, and does with it in that to intend, to intensity and sound. Is there a difference between a sound, a hiss, a kiss, as well? Could they grow and tell it so? It was left to be, to go to see, to saw, to build, to place, to come, to rest, to hand, to be, to couple, to name, to rectify, to do. Saint Ignatius, Saint Settlement. St. Paul says, Saint Anselmo made it be not only obligatory, but very much, as they did in little patches. Saint Therese. Saint Therese. And Saint Therese, might be very much as she would if she very much as she would if she were to be wary. There might be that much, that far, that width, that widen. Never having seen in press, it was a land in one way, altitude by this, to which endowed. Might it be in claim? Saint Therese and conversation in one. Saint Therese in conversation and one. Saint Therese in and one and in and one. Saint Therese left in complete. Saint Therese and better abode. Saint Therese, did she and leave bright snow, sun, one and one out? What is the difference between a picture of a volcano and that? Water and allowed makes a crown. Oysters, ham, and rose tree rose. He arose, and he arose. Saint Therese, not questioned for this, with this, and because. They could remain Latin there, and virgin, Latin there. St. Ignatius to 20, a scene and rivers. Scene 3 and scene 2. How can a sister see St. Therese suitably? Gertrude, cherry blossoms, pink blossoms, and late apples, and surrounded by Spain and lane. I went in, lean, fairly, rejoin, plays, dismiss, calls. Weather, soil. Saint Therese refuses to bestow. Saint Therese with an out. Saint Therese, having felt it, with it, there can be no peace on earth with calm, there can be no peace on earth with calm, there can be no peace on earth with calm, and with whom, who's with calm, and with whom, whose will they, call it there, made, message is special, and come. This amounts to Saint Therese. Saint Therese has been, and has been. What is the difference between a picture and pictured? All saints. Make Sunday, Monday, set. 1, 2, 3. Saint. Scene 3. Saint Therese has been prepared for their big summer. Saint Therese has been prepared for their big summer. Scene 4. To prepare. 1, a window. 2, a shutter. 3, a palace. 4, a widow. 5, an adopted son. 6, a parlor. 7, a shawl. 8, an arbor. 9, a seat. 10, a retirement. Saint Therese has been with him. Saint Therese has been with him. They show that summer makes a child happening at all, to throw a ball, too often to please. Saint Therese in pain, Saint Therese with blame, Saint Therese having been following with them here. In this way, to begin to sin. Just a winter like winter and summer. Goes just a summer like like winter and summer. Though it's just a summer like winter and summer. Though it's just a summer like winter and summer like winter and summer. Though it's just a summer like winter and summer. They make this an act one. Thank you. But I tell you what happened in between agreeing to this, do this benefit. You know Transport Group, the theater? Yeah. Well, anyway, they had a production plan of in a co-pro with NACO, National Asian American Theater Company. They were going to do Edward Albee's A Delicate Balance. They had to postpone the production because of Omicron and concerns about casts infecting something. So they asked me if we could revive a solo I did 11 years ago of a 1925 romantic comedy called The Patsy. So, I've agreed. I'm agreeing to do that. I've agreed to do that. Learning lines for a March 30th opening, and what I was thinking of doing, instead of doing the 4 sets, I would do 10 minutes of The Patsy for you, if you like. It would be interesting in a way because when I did The Patsy, this is 11 years ago, it was from here that I decided to then Transport Group and I went on to Strange Interlude, which is a 6-hour solo performance I gave of an O'Neill play. And by that point, in the middle of that process, I knew I wanted to do one more text to go from a romantic comedy to a modernist drama, and I knew I wanted to do a Stein. I didn't know which one. I tried to play around with some other things, and I finally landed on 4 things. So, you're going to see where it started, and you have now a sense of where it's going. So what I'm going to do is I'll just quickly set up these chairs. It's the set is these. It's just a box, and it's wallpaper. There's no windows or doors. It looks like a room, but there's no windows or doors. And there are just a few chairs, and this is a bureau that's there. Oh God! These are the only chairs, and the only thing you need to know is this is a pipe. And let me see. Do you know what a candlestick telephone is? You know one of those old telephones? You know that? Yeah, that's what this is. Right here. And I think the rest is going to be self-explanatory. Let's give it a whirl. The Patsy, or Love Lesson, a comedy in 3 acts by Barry Connors. Cast of characters. Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Harrington, Grace Harrington, Patricia Harrington, Billy Caldwell, Tony Anderson, Sadie Buchanan. Act 1, 1925. The living room of the Harringtons in a medium-sized town. Evening after dinner. L upper left, is a broad staircase leading to the upper story. Downstage from this is a door leading to the dining room and the rear of the house. Rear C, center, is an alcove and large windows looking out upon a yard where trees screen the light of a distant street lamp. Down right, there is a large door with glass panels on either side leading to the outside. The house is new, or at least newly decorated. The furniture and furnishings denote a middle-class family in well-to-do circumstances. There is a large couch, overstuffed and attractive. There is a table behind it with a reading lamp. Other chairs are about the room. Left, just below the stairs, is a small stand and a telephone. The whole effect should be attractive and comfortable, but not luxurious. But rise, the stage is unoccupied. After a moment, the doorbell rings. Mrs. Harrington descends the staircase, arranging her hair as though having been interrupted in the act of dressing. She runs to a small mirror and looks herself over before answering the doorbell. She opens the front door. Mr. Harrington is there. Here's Mama's baby boy. For heaven's sake, did you make me come all the way down here just to open the door for you? Haven't you got your latchkey? I wanted to surprise you. How's my best girl? Bill, don't muss my hair, will you? I just got through fixing it. What do I care about your old hair? All fixed up pretty? Going somewhere? You know very well this is my bridge club night. How'd you get home so soon? You haven't lost your job, have you? Lost my job? I worked 18 hours yesterday and made 4 towns, and 16 the day before and made 3. If my constituents eat all the groceries I sold the last 3 weeks, the weight reducers are going to be living off the fat of the land. Did you have supper? Yeah, don't worry. I had dinner on the diner. Yes, and I was supposed to cost you $4 or $5 too. No, it didn't cost me $4 or $5. What if it did? The firm's paying for it, ain't they? Well, I'm glad you had a lucky trip. It happened just in time. What do you mean, just in time? Now that Grace is engaged to Billy Caldwell, you've got to get another car. Now, don't start that. I got rid of my old car and I'm going to stay that way. Oh, no, you're not. Oh, yes, I am. I ain't going to try to support a family, an automobile, and the government all on one income. We're not going to get another car. So, you're going to be idiotic again, are you? That's right. Go ahead and insult me, so I'll feel right at home. We've got to have a car. Grace is making a brilliant marriage, and you're not going to ruin it by making us all look like a lot of paupers. I'm telling you that the only way for a poor man to get on his feet is to get rid of his car. I've been down and out for the last time. If you were any kind of father, you'd be glad to be down and out. If your daughter could marry somebody like Billy Caldwell, listen, May, I'm getting old. I can't sell groceries all my life. I've got to say something and invest it. What are the Caldwells going to think of us? Here I am going to the bridge club and having a car like everybody else. I'm going to ride in a streetcar like a common washerwoman. There's just as good people as you are riding in streetcars. Every time we try to love something or be somebody, you don't you? You're going crazy on the subject of society. Everybody we know has got a car. Wait a minute. I've been away 3 weeks. I walk in the house and you start the same old stuff. You getting me? So I hate to come home, May. Even our washerwoman's husband has a car. Listen, May, for 25 years you've been weeping. Every time you want to win an argument, you burst into spring weather. But from now on, I'm going to be a hard-boiled Humpty Dumpty. You don't care what people think of us. You never did. Go ahead, put on the old record and start the phonograph. Go on, blow your head off. You got as much chance of me buying another automobile as you have of seeing a Swiss battleship sinking off the coast of Nebraska. Oh my God. Who's that, Mother? Come on down, beautiful. Is that you, Father? Yeah! Come on down here. Oh, Father. Now, Grace, how does it feel to be engaged? You got my letter then? Were you very surprised? Well, I have to admit I was a little. It all happened kind of sudden, didn't it? I know it did. What's the matter? Don't you like Billy Caldwell?
Sure. As much as I've seen of him.
Great heavens! Are you objecting to him?
No. Only I always kind of thought you and Tony Anderson might get married.
Tony Anderson? You're not comparing Tony Anderson with Billy Caldwell, are you?
Tony Anderson was good enough to spend his money on her for 4 years. What's the matter with him?
I don't love him. That's what's the matter with him.
That's what I mean. You changed your mind kind of sudden, didn't you?
She has the right to change her mind, hasn't she?
Sure she has. But do you think Billy Caldwell will make her as good a husband as Tony?
I think that's something for me to decide. Tony Anderson hasn't got any more money than Billy Caldwell.
Listen, I ain't putting up any arguments. You can marry Caldwell and it's okay with me. Only I can't help feeling a little bit sorry for Tony, that's all. You might not love him, but he certainly is in love with you.
Well, I'm going to marry Billy Caldwell. Don't drop those ashes on the floor.
Well, listen, guys. Whoever you marry, I hope you're going to be very happy.
Only what's the matter with Tony? He doesn't dance. He doesn't play bridge. All he can do is sit around like a bump on a log and talk psychology. And besides, I despise a man who thinks he understands women. Listen, Father. Billy Caldwell is calling for me tonight. I wish well, don't tell him any traveling salesman stories. And watch your language when he's here. Don't say I ate and seen and done it and things like that. He wouldn't understand.
Oh, I gotcha! You're going to marry one of the Caldwells and they're just a little bit ashamed of your old man because he has to go out and peddle groceries. Well, listen, Grace, if one of them groceries I'm peddling, you wouldn't have nothing to eat on the table.
Then groceries! That's the sort of language she's talking about. Oh, what's the use of talking, Mother? They insist on misinterpreting my meaning. I'll be glad when I'm out of this house. I could make a snappy answer to that one. Well, go ahead and make it. You said enough, Bill.
Yeah, maybe I have.
Oh, Mother. Has he heard about Patricia?
What about Patricia?
You better tell him. It makes a lot of difference when it's something about Patricia, doesn't it? That's a pretty tough one to take from you, Grace. I treated you pretty well the last 24 years. Shut your mouth, Grace, and go upstairs. You've had enough to say.
Listen, May! What's the use of fighting like this? It's getting worse all the time. Let's cut it out. What do you say, old girl?
Well, who started it? Never mind who started it.
Now, what did Grace mean about Pat?
Bill, I don't know whether she's in some terrible trouble or whether she's losing her mind. Losing her mind? What happened? We'll begin with it. She's having dinner tonight with that Mr. O'Flaherty, the lawyer of Rose and Bloom and O'Flaherty. He's old enough to be her father. She's had dinner with him twice before this week. She told us she was going to Aunt Margaret's. Is that why you think she's in trouble? I think she's because every time the doorbell rings, she dashes upstairs and hides. But what makes you think she's losing her mind? For the last 2 weeks, she's been going around saying not to cry in the milk because there's tears in it. Who does she say this to? The milkman? She says it to everybody. And when it gets tired saying that, she goes around saying that everybody is a stagehand. And 4 times in the last 2 weeks, I caught her with her door locked at 5 o'clock in the morning, walking around her room, talking to herself and laughing. Maybe something's tickling her. Well, I know he's been so worried about her since the day she was born.
Well, you just don't understand her, man. You never did understand her. Besides, you can't blame her for not coming to you, because every time there's any trouble between her and Grace, you always stick up for Grace.
That isn't so. Yes, it is, and you know it. You got her, so she's just like a stranger in the house. If there's anything wrong with her, it's the way you brought her up.
Every time somebody says something nice about the girls, you raise them.
And every time there's any trouble, I raise them. Whose fault was it? She joins a country club with his drinking and everything else going on.
Why shouldn't she join the country club?
She's 19 years old, and she got out and met some people her own age. She could be the right here if she wanted to, but she won't.
Boys invite her places, and she won't go with them. And they ask if they can call, and she won't let them. You don't really think there's anything really wrong with her head, do you? Well, wouldn't be any great surprise to me. You know, your cousin Egbert wasn't any too sensible. My cousin Egbert? Well, how about your Uncle Johnny? And the insanity in the family didn't come from my side. My Uncle Johnny got kicked by a horse. In the head. That's the reason he was on. Hello, Pop! Gee, I'm glad you're home. Patricia, where have you been? How are you, baby? Have you been a good girl while I was gone? Oh, Pop, I've been so busy, I'm all out of breath. You know that Mr. Eisenwine, who owns an apartment store? Well, he's offered a silver cup to any lady at the country club who can correctly name the 3 Americans who've done the most for this country, musically, politically, and financially, and I think I'm gonna win it. Why don't you stay out of that contest? You know Grace is trying to win that cup. Grace hasn't a chance to win that cup. Well, never mind. Where have you been? Well, what would you say if I told you I was at Aunt Margaret's? I'd say it was an untruth. Then that's exactly what I'm not going to tell you. I had dinner 3 nights this week at the Garfield Hotel with Francis Patrick O'Flaherty of Rosenblum and O'Flaherty. What business have you going to dinner with him? It's going to be a surprise. Please don't make me tell. You'd be surprised to see my name in all the papers, wouldn't you? Well, I wouldn't. Mom, just trying to do something so you'll be proud of me. Oh, I'll answer it. No, I'll. Hello. How do you do, Mrs. Herbert? Which car are you going to catch? The 740? Just a minute. What time have you got? 7:32. Yes, I can make the 740. I'll meet you on the car then. And I hope we get a seat. All right, goodbye. You have to hurry if you're going to catch the 740. Don't I know it? I can tell time. You better find out what she's been up to. Well, Pet, what have you been up to? Are you sure you're not in any trouble, baby? Well, life is like that. 1/3 of our lives we spend in bed, and the other 2/3 we spend in bad. What do you mean by that, baby? Pop, how much do you love me? All right, I got you. Have a good trip, Pop? Ooh, let me look at your nose. I can't tell whether that's sunshine or moonshine. I swear I never saw a drop of liquor while I was gone. That's enough to make anybody swear, isn't it, Pop? Hello, Grace. You going to the bridge club with Mother? I'm going out with Billy Caldwell if he gets here. He's half an hour late. Now, stay! You're not going to wear my new wrap, are you? Mother said I could wear it. But I haven't worn it myself yet. What difference does that make? You're not going anyplace. I'm not going anyplace in that wrap after you wear it first. Why don't you wear your own wraps? Both of them are soiled. Now everybody will say, look, she's wearing her big sister's wrap. You're just flattering yourself. Nobody will ever take that much attention of you. Well, life is like that. All the world's a stage. But most of us are only stage hands. What do you mean by that, Patricia? Oh, you mustn't take everything I say to mean something, Pop. That's being too optimistic. Grace! I don't see why you don't wear your own things. You've got plenty of wraps. I'm engaged to Billy Caldwell. I can't meet the kind of people I have to meet. Look like a pauper. Can I? Never mind, Pop. If it wasn't for the rain, there wouldn't be any hay to make when the sun shines. Mother! Didn't you say I could wear this wrap? Yes. What about it? She says I can't wear it. I said she could wear it tonight. That's all there is to it. I don't want to hear any more about it. I don't think it's right, May. You mind your own business. Well, this is my business. Please, Pop, don't say any more. On the subject of business, all work and no play makes Jack. No! I ask you, is there any sense to that remark? Oh, come on, May. You better hurry if you're going streetcar, I'll put you on it. You needn't bother. As long as I have to ride on the streetcar like a common washerwoman, I can get on it myself. Oh, come on, May. You're all the time crying. That's it. I'm starting on March 30th, so if you want to check it out, we're a Fleet 120. How good.